According to a new report in the Washington Post, Bernie Sanders is refusing to back Elizabeth Warren as Joe Biden's vice president. Now, these are private discussions that are going on. Publicly, Bernie has been very silent in terms of Joe Biden and potential VPs. But this shows me, as we're going to get to, I think Bernie is fighting a little harder behind the scenes than he will publicly. And largely, I think that's because of who's in power right now in terms of the presidency. Because under Barack Obama, you saw Bernie Sanders come out and fight Obama on the grand bargain in terms of conceding to Republicans. But that was when Obama, of course, was president. Right now, with Trump as president, I think Bernie is less willing to publicly attack or criticize Democrats. But if Biden were to become president, I do imagine Bernie's going to be a little more vocal. And potentially, if Warren was Biden's VP, it may prevent or in some way discourage Bernie from being more vocal during a Biden presidency if Warren was the vice president. But let me first get to some of this reporting here from the Washington Post. So they write here, some liberals are backing Elizabeth Warren, who ranks far above others on the left as a potential running mate, but rancor from the primaries has led to schisms on the left. Bernie Sanders, the final competitor to cede to Biden and the liberal figure best positioned to push for concessions, has declined to support Warren despite their ideological alliance, according to three people familiar with his conversations with Biden, who spoke on the condition of anonymity to recount the private discussions. Now, before I move on, I have to just address some of the horrible wording here. Bernie Sanders is not a liberal figure. Whether it's the Washington Post, New York Times, CNN, Fox News, MSNBC, they have to stop with this framing. People on the left are not liberals. Liberal is synonymous with neoliberal. Joe Biden is a liberal. Liberals are about deregulation, privatization, keeping the status quo intact. Bernie Sanders, you can call him a social democrat. He says he's a democratic socialist. You could use that too. Even progressive. He is not a liberal. Liberal is the wrong word. Let's put a lid on that and move on. So stop using liberal. But also this. Warren has declined to support Warren despite their ideological alliance. Now, you could say this was true maybe 4 years ago, but you can't say it anymore. Over the past 6 months, it's been clear that Elizabeth Warren prioritizes her own power over anything else. Warren is not ideological. She's not principled. All she cares about is power. That is the only reason she did not back Bernie Sanders after she dropped out during this primary. She wants power. She figured, hey, if I sit back and Bernie wins, I could be his VP. If I, sit back and Biden wins, I could be his VP. So she thought by staying out of it that she would have more power regardless of who won. Now, I think that was stupid on her part. If she actually did care about power and was smart about it, she would have backed Sanders and realized that then would lead her to have, if Biden won in that scenario, it then leads her to have the ability to then be Biden's VP and actually bring people along with you. It would have made her a much more attractive vice president for Joe Biden had Warren backed Bernie Sanders. Now, you may say Biden would have been less inclined to pick Warren had she backed Sanders during the primary, but I don't think that's true either. Because as I'm telling you, Warren would have had more power. The left, the progressive left, the Bernie supporters would have actually trusted Elizabeth Warren had she backed Bernie once she dropped out. But she didn't. So now she has no power. So even if Biden chooses Elizabeth Warren, how many of those supporters are really going to come over? This goes back to the real issue here with Joe Biden. He has no ability to attract the left. His only hope would be to pick Bernie Sanders as VP, and of course, that's not going to happen. Joe Biden, with his long 40-year track record of being on the wrong side of every single major issue, the allegation from Tara Reid that's against him right now, his mental state, his current platform, Joe Biden is a horrible candidate in every sense of the word. So his only hope right now, as he's clearly not going after voters on the left, his only real hope is to get out enough anti-Trump voters. Are there going to be enough Democratic voters that didn't vote in 2016 for Hillary Clinton that will come out for Biden in 2020? Who knows? But that appears to be his bet because he is really not at all trying to appeal to Sanders supporters. Now, I also got to mention here, just in terms of Elizabeth Warren, I got off track there for a second. Elizabeth Warren, the idea that she has an ideological alliance with Bernie Sanders after what? She backed off of Medicare for All to support a public option, a two-piece healthcare plan, where the first plan is passing a public option, which is the Joe Biden plan, and then somehow 3 years later, you're going to fight for Medicare for All, having a second healthcare fight in Congress? Yeah, okay. Nobody believes that. So Elizabeth Warren backed off Medicare for All to support a public option. She also took on a campaign super PAC after fighting the entire campaign saying, super PACs are bad. I denounce super PACs. No candidate in the race for Democratic primary should have a super PAC. She then takes on a campaign super PAC as soon as her campaign's about to die, which then led her to stay in the race much longer than her ability to actually win, in turn hurting Sanders on Super Tuesday, cutting into his ability to win states. So she took on that campaign super PAC, hurt the only people-powered movement, Bernie Sanders, in the race. And then she also, before that, she smeared Sanders, claiming that he told her that a woman couldn't win. And this is after it's well known that back in 2016, Bernie tried to get Elizabeth Warren to run for president. Why would he have done that if he thought a woman couldn't win? The whole, the idea that they are aligned, that Warren and Bernie are aligned, is hilarious if you look at any friggin' data point. And also, it was clear when Warren didn't back Bernie, when she dropped out, when she eventually finally dropped out, the fact that she didn't back Sanders over Biden, it was clear at that point that she was putting corporations over people, because there was one obvious people-powered movement with Bernie Sanders and the other, Joe Biden, was completely corporate-powered. So by you backing out and not endorsing any, the default goes to the people or to the campaign with all the corporate power, all that money, all those interests. It's clear Warren has no ideological alliance with Bernie Sanders. Now, I also want to mention just one more quote from this piece, because it goes on to say one more thing here. So, quote, Senator Sanders and his team are not advising the Biden's campaign vice presidential selection process in any way, shape, or form, said Sanders spokesman Mike Kaska, who said the senator's priority remains the party platform. Liberal groups were dismayed that Biden's vice presidential vetting panel, which he announced last week, included no names close to their movement. Now, dismayed? It was pretty obvious that Joe Biden was never actually going to fight to have any real left-wing voices on his vetting panel, let alone in his campaign at all. So, it was obvious that was always going to be the case. So Bernie's focus right now is simply the party platform, which, look, I get it. This was his focus in 2016 with Hillary Clinton. He got some platform concessions from her back then. But ultimately, the party platform doesn't really mean anything. So if you look at other, look in Canada, for example, the platforms actually do matter. They are referenced often after these campaigns, these governments form. But when it comes to U.S. politics, the party platform is really never discussed, not focused on at all. It's pretty much just a piece of paper that's like a reference point, but it doesn't actually mean anything. So even if Bernie Sanders gets concessions in Biden's party platform, it doesn't mean they're going to fight for them. So I just think it's the wrong place to put his power. I think he should be focusing on down ballot races, discussing and pushing out their endorsing candidates that are primary challengers, that are progressive primary challengers to sitting Democrats. I think that's where Bernie's power is. But again, he may feel like it's the wrong time to do it because he wants to get out Trump. He doesn't want to create any division within the Democratic Party. I'm not defending his position. I'm just saying I think this is his thinking. So he rather use his power privately than publicly. So again, I'm not endorsing his strategy here. I think at one point you could have argued it was a good idea to fight harder in private than you are publicly against the Democratic Party, because it essentially means that you can still attain or retain positions on various committees. Because if you're publicly fighting against like Nancy Pelosi, for example, or Chuck Schumer, you're not going to be getting those positions on committees. You're not going to be looked to by the Democratic Party to lead anything. But if you're doing it privately, they can still look at you and say, okay, you're fighting us privately, but you're not doing publicly. That's fine. So I think Sanders views it in that way. But at this point, how much power or how much change are those committees, are those positions? How much is it really doing? I mean, ultimately here, it's clear the Democratic Party leadership, the consultants and the corporations have the power over the party and not Bernie Sanders. So at one point, maybe you could make the argument that Bernie's strategy here was smart. Now, I don't think you can make that argument anymore. I think he has to be vocal about what is wrong with the Democratic Party, what is wrong with these candidates. He has to back primary challengers. He has to do all this stuff publicly when he has power now. But his thinking is different. And the reality is, look, I think if Joe Biden won the presidency, I do imagine that, like I was saying earlier, I do imagine that Bernie would be vocal against the Joe Biden presidency the way he was against Barack Obama. But he's not going to do it right now when the person in power is Donald Trump. But just to get back to Elizabeth Warren for a second here, I do think that is a good thing that he's not backing Elizabeth Warren for vice president. You don't want to give Biden the impression that this is where your interests are or this is where your power is, and then give Biden the ability to say, well, I gave in to Bernie Sanders, I gave in to the progressive movement, I gave them what they wanted Elizabeth Warren, they got it. He can't do that. He can't say that if Bernie is not backing Warren behind the scenes. So, I mean, in addition to that, Warren, even if, like, when you look at polling, Warren actually does perform well as a potential running mate for Joe Biden. But regardless of the election, when it comes to actual change, when it comes to the ability for a vice president to actually help people, to put real investment into healthcare, to push for Medicare for all, to push for student debt cancellation, to push for higher wages, whatever it is, to push for the Green New Deal, you're not going to get that from Elizabeth Warren. Seeing how obvious it is that Elizabeth Warren cares most about her own power, she's going to be a loyal soldier. She'll just back whatever Joe Biden backs and ultimately not fight for anything. So there is no good vice presidential pick that Joe Biden could make that is realistic in terms of what he would choose. Like, he's not going to pick Bernie Sanders. He's not going to pick Nina Turner. Apart from those two, I don't see anybody actually willing to challenge him as his vice president. So Elizabeth Warren, by Bernie not backing her, I think he's making the right choice.